Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry.
This week, we are going to talk about licensing, which is like the coolest and maybe most interesting part of intellectual property bracket of People's Guide to Publishing.
You have like a wild and varied decades of experience with all things licensing, so I'm excited to see what you say about this.
I picture myself like flying through a jungle when you say that. Like being chased by, I don't know, like a horde of ants.
That's only because you think licensing is cool and interesting, which I believe our listeners probably do not yet believe, so let's convince them.
How dare you?
It's your job to bring them into the fold.
I just can't.
What is the nature of this magical wonderland?
So, I mean, I would like to quote a former guest of the pod, Curtis Lowe here, who on the telephone many years ago, when I prompted the question to him, when I found out how cool it would be and that we could actually distribute our own books rather than having a trade distributor, I was like, Curtis, why wouldn't every publisher do this? And he responded, well, Joe, people outsource all kinds of things. I mean, some publishers outsource all of their editorial work and just license finished books from other publishers. And I was like, you just blew my mind.
Like, you don't even need to make a book.
Mm-hmm. That you, and then I think about it, and I'm like thinking about a number of instances where like we had these editorial projects that like flew wildly out of control, and and then
Getting
how much
here.
cheaper it would be to just license content from a foreign publisher for $500 a year or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and like how we have reasonably had that offer many times over. And then to think of like how many times we spent $5,000 or $10,000 on like the developing of a book, and and I'm like, right, yep. So that is in a nutshell what licensing is. Mm-hmm. And then conversely, it's you doing that, like when we talked in a previous episode about like, you are probably not the most qualified person to make an audiobook of your book. So you could conceivably you could sell those rights to somebody. Really, you're leasing those rights. You never actually sell rights because you are leasing rights from the author, unless you are the author, and then you are in turn subleasing those rights to somebody else to make an audiobook for a period of time, and then you have agreements, and then your agreements say that you have the agreement to give them those agreements, etc. Like we sold audio rights for How to Resist Amazon to a Libra FM who, will use it mostly to market themselves and how cool independent bookstores and Independent Bookstore Day is. And, and that's like an interesting thing, and then they will put the author in a studio who will record the book, and, we did it really fast, which was really fun too, because a lot of times, like it feels like most of what happens in publishing is so slow, whereas like when you have a book that's like ramping up towards publication, a lot of times people want to synchronize those dates. So, like you'll have a synchronized release in the UK with the US or in Australia with the US, etc. Like we had a book, I believe last year, maybe the year before, where we sold rights to an Australian publisher who published, their own edition. It was identically typeset. They used not only our editorial work, but our typesetting as well. And then they just put their own cover on it. And I felt like it was really cool to see that, because that's often really interesting. I felt like our cover was better. I might be biased, but, things like that. And then, when I run into that, that's like another thing that really fascinates me when we license audio editions. And let's say 70% of the time they use our cover for the audio edition, and then the 30% of the time that they like throw away our cover and make a new one from scratch. That like always, it's like, mind-blowing for me to be like, I wonder what that decision was like, and what was the discussion, because it's like you don't really get brought in on those decisions.
So for our listeners or viewers who are publishers and are thinking, oh, I would love to not deal with editorial and development and all of that, like, how can I license other works? What is your advice?
I would say to go to, and this was advice given to me years ago, which I could not fully understand the wisdom of at the time. Thank you, Joe Matthews at Independent Publishers Group. I was too young and too inexperienced then. That you would find a like-minded foreign publisher, say, like, ideally in a country that speaks the same language that you do, and or rather your market is in. So like if you're only getting books in Portuguese and you have to translate them all into Italian, that's gonna like be a tremendous amount of work and probably not worthwhile. So you want to find somebody that has the same language market that you do, and then you would just say, like, I would like to propose that we have this standing agreement, and I get first pick at your titles. And you basically want to feel good about the editorial choices they make consistently, mostly the big picture, not the comma placement, but so much as like what they publish, and that you understand it and could represent it and discuss it confidently like it was your own, because it kind of will be your own. And then to, we have standing agreements where we say, it's called first right of refusal. So we say, every time we make a book, they get first dibs. If they pass on it, then we show it to everybody else. And so you would propose something like that, where you would say, let's take a look, and then if I'm not interested, then you can go shop it around. But, you have the assuredness that I would probably buy most things.
So when you do this, can you then make edits to the book, or do you have to do it as is, or does it depend on your agreement?
It depends on the agreement, yeah. So you typically have, there's like a stupid line that's like consistent and true to form with, because, the reality is like when we license a book in Japanese, I have no way of verifying that that is in fact true.
Right, that's true.
It's like I can't go in and like put it into Google Translate and get a consistent, representation of like what that translates to.
Yeah.
And so because it's like that's the whole point of it, is like you're basically saying, I'm not just going to dump this all into Google Translate. I'm going to hire a qualified translator,
right,
to make this book work.
Or if the book is already in English, you might need to like Americanize the spelling, or like I would say, there's one book that I guess we didn't really license it from another publisher. The other publisher let it go, and then we made a new contract with the author. But we did do some I would say just line editing changes, where we like modernized some of the statistics and some of the language around gender, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we've done that quite a few times over the years, and just because a lot of times something that is too small for somebody else is like just right for us.
Totally. Like if something is out of print from another publisher, that's another case where like you wouldn't necessarily be licensing it. You'd be trying to help the author get those rights back, so you could then start fresh, but with an existing book.
Yeah, so this has been sort of like, we have a book right now where we're like wrestling it loose, where in theory it's been out of print for like 3 or 5 years even, and they still they haven't reported sales, and they won't quite say, no, it's no longer ours. They, the publishers are a little bit dodgy with that, especially big publishers, because they just have so many properties that they don't want things to like, fall loose by accident. They want things to, you kind of have to sometimes be like, okay, you either put it back in print or it's not yours, and so that is the long and the short of it.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
on Twitter at Microcosm,
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful